You're listening to the Ask Drone U podcast. You ask, we answer your drone questions. Whether you're here to turn your passion into profit or you simply fly for fun, we're a community of learners and teachers who aspire to achieve greatness. We are
Drone U.
Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are. Welcome to another fun episode of Ask Drone U. My name is Paul.
My name's Rob. Welcome for joining us today. Did I just say welcome for joining us?
Yes.
It's been a while since I've been behind this mic, believe it or not. Anyways, welcome. It is episode 919. Glad you're with us. Back in the studio. It's been a little while because you've been on the road, so welcome home.
Have been on the road. Yeah, I've actually been on the road for a very long time.
Yeah.
Kind of done with being on the road. No,
literally for a while anyway.
It really takes it out of me because I'm working typically all day from wake up to go to sleep on the training.
Sun up to sundown, as the farmer says.
But I know a lot of people found it worthwhile, and after picking up a few challenge coins from that NTSB training, I'm very, very, very excited on how the training went. And I'm very excited to do more of those trainings. As we found out, we will be doing another one. We were invited back, so that's a huge, huge thing. So
yeah, it's a huge compliment.
Yeah, it's a huge compliment. See, I'm not awake either, so probably maybe in episode 920 I'll wake up.
That's all right.
But we are here today to talk about how drone pilot vetting is so important, and what do those flight hours mean? How much weight should you give a particular pilot on their flight hours? Because there are different types of flight hours. And this also goes to show a much more macro issue with vetting drone pilots. And we're going to talk about that because more and more companies are coming to us saying, you know, we can see people can take a test and they may know theoretically how to do things and how to fly, but it doesn't really mean that they're able to fly, and it doesn't really showcase any verification of trust.
Yeah.
And I think that also goes to show, you know, many of the problems with the new TOPS program that was rolled out by AUVSI, a non-governing body to try to give out drone pilot and drone training certifications. Very excited to talk about that. Tracy Lamb reached out back to us, and I'm actually really stoked on her email because I'm going to read it on the show, as I believe it's wrought full of issues. But I think it should be fun because the TOPS program is something that, like, if you know Tracy Lamb, right, you get an email from her. It's like Tracy Lamb, MBA, BRA, LARN, SASM, LA, blah, 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 BF, whatever. I mean, like, the signature is 2 lines long. And for someone with that many certifications,
it's not an exaggeration.
With that many certifications, I think it says a lot about the program in itself. Another piece of paper, certificate form. I just wish they would have reached out to us and asked us about this beforehand and after I had written an article about the whole thing back in March. But
there's probably a lot of discussion to be had about that, and debate even, right?
Yeah.
That's something that would be debated, and so I think to talk about that, we'd probably need to have both sides. I think that'd be a more beneficial approach to that.
Well, that's why I have her email here. I have both sides.
Well, no, that's not exactly.
And I get to call out a lot of the misinformation that there's a new Part 141 UAS drone school regulation coming down the line, and I can now confirm that that's not true because in order to be a Part 141 drone school, that would mean that every pilot that comes through here would have to be Part 61. So that doesn't really work. But anyway, we're not going to go too deep on that. But I figured it'd be a good way to get fired up. And
yeah, no doubt.
So let's go ahead and play today's question, which is more focused on how can you actually vet pilots. And we're going to deep dive today because people are vetting pilots and there are key performance indicators and deep diving on information for what companies should really be focusing on. So I'm really excited about that today, but I just wanted to showcase that there's an overall macro issue at hand here, and it's beyond the TOPS program. And I think the TOPS program was an attempt to try to solve this problem, but it fundamentally fails because, once again, you have the trust but no verification. So I think it's going to be really cool to see some other programs coming out that say, okay, well, we've actually been following the pilots, we've been seeing what they've been doing, and we can say this person is trusted and verified. So
interesting. Well, she has offered to come on the show.
She has.
So we need to probably do that.
Yes, I'm so afraid of like completely ripping her a new one, but
Well, maybe she can
and
take it, and maybe she could do some ripping of her own.
I'm sure she could actually.
Right?
Knowing
So-
her Australian self, I'm sure she could. So that being
I don't know what
said,
that means.
Australians are feisty. That's
Really?
all. Oh, I love Australians.
Oh, I didn't know they were feisty.
I think having her on the show would be good, but I'd like to be much more prepared because after showing her email to a couple of people around Drone U and some other big wigs up at the FAA, they were just like, yeah, that's not true. So I would love to, maybe I should hold my cards then in this show
I think so.
before
I think
I
that's a really good idea.
throw them all out. All right.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have issues with the TOPS program. 3 separate schools have reached out to me directly to say, can we come out as an association to say that this TOPS program is a problem? And I was just like, well, I wrote an article back in March and no one paid attention to it. So,
Can you reissue an article?
yeah, we could just put it out as Drone U. I put it on my Taken Flight site because I was worried that maybe everyone wasn't on board with my message. So, but now after doing deep research, I'm like, there's no reason you shouldn't be on board with my message.
That's hilarious. For
So
many reasons. Anyways, are we ready for the question?
let's go ahead
do
and
it.
play the question, which, by the way, is brought to you by our new GCP landing pads. We've actually already sold out of a lot of the pre-orders. They're on their way. They should be here by the end of the year, if not the first week of the year. And if you love drone mapping, you're going to love these landing pads. Why? They're the first landing pads that incorporate scale constraints and a GCP marker on the landing pad. The square shape means the pad doesn't kick up as much. And now with stake loops, you can actually keep them staked to the ground so that they don't move for whatever reason. On top of that, we actually just had, I got to get his permission before we can put his name and review on there. But I just got a review back from the class that was hosted by the NTSB, and the review was just like, since we use the GCP landing pads, my reprojection error decreased by an order of magnitude 2 or 3x. So that's significant. If you're in drone mapping and you don't understand what reprojection error is, check it out. But more importantly, check out those landing pads, which are now, they're on our website, right?
They are. I don't think they're on our website, but we'll put the link in the show notes for sure.
Because we do have a landing page for them.
We do have a landing page, yes.
And they were launched just last week, so no, you haven't missed out on them, but we are almost halfway sold out of the first run, which I think that says a lot about them.
Yeah, if you're interested, I would hop on it because we got a small first run just to see how the market would respond to them, and it's responding very well. So you might want to check them out. In fact, I've gotten a couple of emails in my email box saying, did I see that those are out? I need those. Where do I buy them? So more and more people are
I'm
interested.
just so
in them.
happy that there's so much value in those landing pads.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. That's who was sponsoring today's show, landing pads. Yeah.
Hey, Paul. Hey, Rob. Quick question here. How much do you value flight time? If you're doing a commercial job, mapping a farm, 500 acres, or a residential photography, let's say 6 hours of work a day, how much do you value that flight time? Would you pay $6,000 for an hour and a half on one battery for that drone? Would you pay $8,000 for 2 hours? Just curious on your scale of that. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the question, Adam. Really, really appreciate it. Hopefully we get the interpretation of your question right.
Well, okay, let's be honest here. Sometimes the interpretation of the question is different from the perspective that we choose to take the question.
That's fair.
For example, he's asking a very directed question about like, how do you value flight time? And then how do you create some sort of equation to value someone's quote on their flight time? But I think that this is also, there's a greater issue at hand here, which is how do companies which are hiring more and more drone pilots vet their pilots? And what are they supposed to be looking at? And what does that mean? Because people really haven't put out that information. And talking into some of these larger scale companies, we're realizing that they're having a significant problem with actually something that Drone U does really well, which is recurrent training. It's, it's, okay, I vetted this pilot. We built this team off these pilots, and we know they went through training, but based off of the analytics we're getting back, what they say that they're doing and what they're doing are two different things. So now companies are trying to look at different ways to vet their pilots. They're trying to look at flight hours. They're trying to look at how many safety warnings to come on screen, which safety warnings are important. Then on top of that, they're looking at how did the pilot fly? Did the pilot fly low and slow, or did the pilot fly high and slow? That doesn't sound like a big difference, but it's actually a significant difference, Rob. You know why?
Why?
Because just like in insurance where we can calculate risk, would you say with a significant degree of scientific certainty that, I love using that phrase because I hate it in the legal community, would you say that you could make a reference that if a pilot is flying at super low altitudes at a given time with a long distance, lateral distance from themselves, that they probably aren't the safest pilot because they're flying lower to the trees, they probably couldn't maintain visual line of sight, and you could probably would you say it's fair that you could conclude those things from that data versus a pilot who's flying high and slow, you know that they're already clearing the trees by, say, a distance of 100 feet or more, thus significantly reducing the chances of them getting in an accident?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't disagree with that statement. I think it's just wrought with issues, though, in terms of sort of being the devil's advocate to where we're going with this. I love it when
you play David. I love it. Go for it.
It concerns me. It makes me think of like the deep state of China and how people in China, I don't know if you guys know this, but it's really fascinating to me how China is kind of watching their people more than we realize. And I don't know that America's that different.
America is different in the sense that there are private companies that are doing it, but I think that we're coming into an age where we are going to start regulating the crap out of it.
Yeah. So anyways, my point in saying that is that there's just this overwhelming aspect of technology whereby you're always being watched. And so, for example, if a company is looking to evaluate a pilot and they're using the data that's available in all the apps that pilot is using, they're not necessarily getting the context, right? So unless they are. And so correct me if I'm wrong.
Unless the application can say the wind was this, visibility was this.
Or where were they? Or maybe I'm new and maybe I'm just learning. Or maybe I was just out having fun and I was in the middle of nowhere. And who cares if I was flying low and fast because I was in a place where I could? Who cares if I crashed? Who cares if the app says that I was flying unsafe because I was in a position to where I could and I knew that? How does the app tell them that kind of stuff to give them the full picture?
That's a fantastic question, and I don't think that it does on many cases unless a company is using someone like KittyHawk, where KittyHawk is able to say, because their app showcases all the information that you just mentioned, which is context. What airspace are they flying in? Are there any TFRs? What was visibility that day? Was the pilot flying in visibility that was too low? Did the pilot get warnings on screen? All that information, but to continue playing devil's advocate, right? What about all those wind warnings that people get? I mean, I get 10, 15, 20 wind warnings, and it typically doesn't affect the way that I fly.
No.
But I'm a more advanced pilot. So then how do you separate categories of pilots and what they're capable of doing versus risk assessment?
Absolutely, you've got that. But again, I think the most important part of all of this, as far as I'm concerned, if we're going to use this data to evaluate pilots, is context. Because I don't care if you're 100 times better pilot than me, which you are.
Well, thank you.
But if let's talk about the wind warning. If you're flying a job in a commercial environment where there's other people, et cetera, not that you're flying over people, but you get my point. We'll just call it a more serious paradigm of a job. Versus me in that same wind with that same wind warning, and I'm in a parking lot that seems like I'm in a busy place, but it's very clear and there's nobody around. Who cares?
That's a good point. But what about this scenario? What about a pilot who has data that they're flying beyond twilight or sunset, because that time is typically recorded in your iPhone if you're using an iPhone, and then the app were to showcase, and then this is just hypothetical, so hold on. So if if the app knows that I'm flying at night, and then the app were able, and no app can do this, but if the app were then go to the pilot's registry and see that the pilot was not actually a 107 pilot and that they do not have a night waiver, wouldn't that showcase then that what the pilot does versus what the pilot says are two radically different things, and that maybe that person should not be taken for face value?
Absolutely. But I think you're just kind of restating the point in that context matters. And so there are definitely instances in which it's pretty cut and dry. And I think that would be one of them. But I'm afraid that the majority of these decisions would not be based on cut and dry information. that's available to them?
Well, I think they could make algorithms though that say if this then that, if this then that, if this then that.
They absolutely could. They don't exist yet. But number two is, how easy is it for these companies and these, we'll call it, project managers, people that are managing the drone, the UAV element of the business. How deep are they going into the information available to them? Or are they kind of keeping it at a surface level? Oh, this guy got a wind warning and he flew. He's out. I'm exaggerating, right?
Yeah, no, it's a very
But how deep are they going to go into the analysis of that information that's available or maybe not even available to them? I don't know. I just think it's like anything. Especially in today's day and age, we just dive headfirst into some of this stuff without really understanding the best way to use the information available.
Yeah.
So that's my fear when it comes to this kind of stuff. I'm sure it'll get figured out. And I hope that we can be a part of figuring that out.
I hope that we can as well. And I would say that, I think that we can provide a lot of value in that aspect. Now, that being said, when it comes to flight hours specifically, before we answer the caller's question directly, which, by the way, if you have a question, go to askdroneu.com, upload your question. But in discussing flight hours, right, if I'm a company, and this is actually further going down into the rabbit hole that you essentially started digging. So I'm going to follow the white rabbit and say that, and if you don't get
white
that.
and not black.
No, that was a reference from The Matrix.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't making it racial. I was never mind.
He's like, wrong rabbit hole.
That's not what I meant. Oh my gosh.
Says the guy who has black kids and white kids.
That's right.
Anyways. So if you haven't watched The Matrix, follow the white rabbit is the secret way that he figures out that the Matrix is actually the environment that he created, and he learns that it's not the only environment. I think it actually has more and more to do with the world we live in today. But anyway, that's not important. Going back down the rabbit hole of how do we know these algorithms are doing the right thing, this brings up a perfect segue into flight hours, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's logged in DJI Go every time, you fly through third-party apps, that information is available. But because I have not pulled down the DAT files yet, and I actually just learned about the depth of the DAT files because of Bill from the NTSB, and I'm fascinated. And by the way, if you guys were at the NTSB class, I'm going to be sharing the accident report from the midair collision testing that we were doing. But only with the people who were at the class, because if you weren't at the class, well, it sucks to suck. So anyway, come to the next class.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Be it a future one.
I think it was the most fun I've ever had drone training. And then to have, some of the people that were there say that this is some of the best depth of drone training, it just made me super happy. But okay, back to the course. Flight hours. If we're using third-party apps, are the DAT files saying that the flight was autonomous, or are these algorithms just calculating all the flight hours? Because a pilot who goes out and flies every morning and every evening, summer through winter, is going to be one type of pilot because they're experiencing the cold environments and the necessary variables that they need to correct in order to fly in the cold environments, and they're also flying in the summer environments. Are they flying at differing elevations? Meaning, are they realizing that flying in Colorado is going to vastly decrease their voltage per cell? Or are they going to just be flying always in California and think that they're always going to be flying for 30 minutes at a time, right? Because that is, you want to know situational awareness. If you're trying to determine risk management, did that pilot fly 1,000 hours while flying through PIX 4D? Because if he did, then I know the pilot is still a novice, even though the pilot may say that he thinks he knows what he's doing and is intermediate. I mean, one of the reviews that we got from the flight mastery course out at the NTSB Training Academy was, and I was super grateful for this. He goes, I would always kind of got the reference. He didn't say this. I got the reference that maybe the perception of Drone U is that, we're for entry-level pilots and we're just for the, the guys starting out. But the review was like, I was completely humbled by the training that we received in flight mastery. And it showed me just how much I still have yet to learn in drone flying. And I think that says a lot about that pilot and his ability to learn, but also his ability to say, wow, I'm not as good as I thought I was. And I think that's important for every pilot, even pilots like myself and like Peter, to step back and say, look, we've been flying this way for 5 years. We need to make sure that we're always following our checklist, right? I mean, this is one of the questions on the FAA Part 107 is, why do pilots have checklists? And the answer is because the human mind is fallible.
Well, I always take it to the analogy of the professional athlete. I do this with my kids because take the you pick the professional athlete, best in the world, whoever that is to you. They still have a coach. They still get coached. They still realize they want and need to get better.
And why is that?
I don't know what you mean by why is that.
The way that I see it is that everyone needs that for one particular reason, which is we're all human and we all need to hold each other accountable.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think the number one is to hold yourself accountable. But yeah, if you have people around you that can hold you accountable, i.e. a coach, but you got to know that you need it.
Yeah.
Right? That's kind of step one. So anyways.
Yeah, no, it's really important. So going back to flight hours, as a company and you're valuing the flight hours, I think it's important that you, as a solution to this problem, because one thing I can't stand is people complaining, especially the Facebook complainers, and then they never come up with a potential solution. It's like, have you ever thought, complainers, that like, yes, there's a problem, but have you ever thought about the receptivity to your complaint if it were attached with a solution? I'm just going to ask that question, leave that there. My point in this is that companies who are vetting pilots should look at flight hours in were the flights done via a third-party application, because I think that would showcase it, like, okay, they were flying Litchi, they were flying in Pix 4D, they were flying in Maps Made Easy, they were flying in another of the mapping application softwares, right? Then, we could further dive into that and say, okay, if it was a third party, are we able to see which mode they were flying in the third party? Because, for example, and our mappers learn this at NTSB, free flight mode takes significant piloting skills, right? You have to avoid obstacles. Application is already calculating overlap, but you're trying to get typically in areas that are difficult to map, difficult areas that you want to cover. I would definitely give more precedence to someone who is flying in free flight mode in Pix 4D rather than just flying through Pix 4D.
Sure.
See, I mean, that's if then this, if then this. Now, that being said, if I'm looking at flight hours, I would also want to see, again, the flight hours. What type of aircraft were they flying? Did they build up an aircraft? Are they continuing to test themselves on different aircraft? Because the Spark flies completely differently from a Phantom, which flies completely differently from an Inspire.
Right.
And when you're flying an Inspire, problems happen much faster than anything else because you have more sensitivity in the sticks. These are all things I'd want to know.
I would also want to know what kind of, again, I keep coming back to this, but the context, meaning what were they doing while flying? So, for example, 1,000 hours of just kind of out in a field is much different than, say, a high pressure environment where you're inspecting cell towers and having to get up real close.
And the guide wires, yeah.
And those kinds of things. So what kind of flying have they done? Because if you've got 1,000 hours of flight time, but you haven't done anything real difficult as far as pressure is concerned, and now I'm going to pull you into my company and put you in more of a high pressure situation flying, you're going to be better than the guy that has 1 hour, but not necessarily the guy that has 100 hours, but he's been flying high pressure situations.
So the way that we could see that in DJI Go 4 or the DJI files is saying when this pilot was flying, which flight mode was he flying in? And number 2, was he getting radar chart on display? And number 3, how many warnings was he getting in obstacle avoidance? Because then we could say, okay, we know that his proximity to other subjects was very close the entire flight, but he was flying in attitude mode, so we know he's able to handle those high pressure environments better. And he still had display chart on to see how far he was from these objects, and it showcased that the environment in which he was flying was actually heavily saturated with obstacles.
There you go. Yeah.
I could keep going. I'm just saying.
So a lot of that data is available, it sounds like. But then again, you got to get into it and evaluate it.
I'm not going down that rabbit hole because I just heard some speculation in the community that pilots' data is more accessible than we had thought. But I'm not. I want to check that first. So, that being said, to answer our caller's question in particular or specifically, how do you value someone who's asking for $6,000 to fly a battery and a half, unless they're flying an Alta 8 with a red weapon 8K and a cinema lens on it? I'm definitely not paying anybody anywhere close to that price point for a battery and a half.
Well, ultimately, it's about the deliverable. It's asking the wrong question.
I agree 100%. So then how do you look at the problem at hand, and what do you believe the solution is for our caller?
Well, again, I'm not 100% sure I understand the angle of the question, but
That he was asking, or that
yeah,
we
that he
answered?
is asking.
Gotcha.
So as far as how do you value the time on the sticks relative to a job,
Hmm.
it depends on the job.
See, I would more want to see the output from the pilot rather than the data. Because, for example,
Right.
like
Yeah.
I've been watching a lot of television on Southwest because their Wi-Fi was out, and there are so many shots. And I mean, Netflix especially. Man, I've been watching a lot of Netflix stuff, and their drone footage, generally speaking, is garbage. And like, for example, I was just watching the movie Den of Thieves, and they were literally showcasing this aerial where they're tilting the camera up, and you could tell that the cameraman had never set his gimbal pitch smoothness ever, because he literally hard stops middle of the shot, and they keep playing the shot, and I'm like, oh, how did you get that job? Like, oh.
Somebody's kid.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that, I think someone said wisely the other day that passion can definitely push out skill, but passion only lasts so long. And skill will always overtake quality and skill. It may take 2 years, but will always overcome someone who's passionate and ignorant.
Yeah, it makes me think of the story, and I'm going to butcher the story, so forgive me about, and you might remember this. I think it might be a story that was in the Scaling Up book, where I think
You mean that book right there?
That book right there. Where there was a particular consultant who understood the way this particular equipment worked in the manufacturing plant, right? And let's call it IBM. They called him in and say, hey, we can't figure out what's wrong. He goes in there. He's there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes tops. And he fixes it. And then they say, okay, great, thank you. Send us a bill. He sends them a bill for $10,000. And they freak out and they say, what in the world is this? Why are you charging us $10,000? Can you break that down for us? And he said, yes. It was, let's just say, $100 for the 10 minutes and the part to fix it. It was $9,900 to know what part and where to put it.
Wow.
Right? And so if you're that kind of pilot where you know what drone to use.
Centurion, are you listening to this right now?
What cameras to use, what drone to use when, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, how to edit. I mean, how to get the right shot so that you're in a position to be able to edit. All those kinds of things, that's where the value is. Again, so the time, we're not going to value the time on the sticks that much to answer your question.
I think to put your story in parallel with a drone pilot, when someone, for example, is shooting a live stream of an action sports event, you're not paying $1,500 or $2,000 per day for the pilot. You're paying $4,000, $5,000 per day to have the drone 10 feet from the subject at a high rate of speed with a pilot who has the experience to not chop the heads off of the crew surrounding him trying to film as well.
Yeah, getting world-class shots that will make people go, wow.
Whoa. Like flying through a Huey helicopter?
Yeah, I haven't seen that yet.
Oh,
but
I'm sorry, I did that last week.
I figured I need to see that.
Got a really cool picture of that.
Anyways, yeah.
Do you think we did a good job of answering our caller's question?
I hope so. I mean, as always, if not, please let us know.
I mean, as far as to really go back into your specific question, without knowing the deliverable and the value, I think it's hard to answer that question, but I would be willing to pay a pilot a significant rate if he is able to significantly reduce the risk. And then that goes back to how you vet the pilot, which is why I believe all of this was really important in answering the question.
Yeah, no, it's great. I appreciate how a question comes through and I'm more of a literal thinker and I'm thinking, okay, we got to answer this question. And you always go, wait, there's something over here we need to talk about. Okay, so it works.
On that bombshell, that is going to do it for us today, guys. If you have a question, go to Ask Drone U. Also, thank you for those increased reviews on iTunes. Really appreciate it. If you could take 30 seconds and leave us a review, I would really appreciate it. Also want to say I am very, 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 very grateful to the NTSB for hosting our training at the NTSB Training Academy. I'm also very grateful for some of the things that the NTSB team did for us. Josh, Aaron, Kathy, Mike, Bill, all of you guys, thank you so much. Also want to say a very special thank you to Jason Flakes, PJ Kirkpatrick, Joshua Baker, Oh man, there's so many people that went into
Certainly
this whole
on
thing.
God.
I want to thank you as well, Rob
Oh.
Burdick. I want to thank you. I also want to thank Tim, and I want to thank On Good Sing from Pix4D. I want to thank Anna from Pix4D.
Yeah.
Also want to thank Nicoletta from Pix4D. Thank you very much. And also, it was really awesome to meet On Good's dad this weekend through FaceTime. So I know you're listening, and thank you. It was really nice meeting you. Super intelligent, funny guy. Like I was like, On
Yeah,
Good, I
sounds
know
cool.
where you get it from now. Like this guy's awesome.
Sorry I missed the experience, but
No.
maybe the next one.
That's going to do it for us today, guys. Thanks again for listening. My name is Paul.
My name's Rob.
This is Ask Drone U.